This is week 3 of the spring trimester of 2018. This week for my portrait painting, I've been really working on the key, getting all the values accurate, showing the darkest values and the brightest values so I can have like a nice range in between them. One thing that really helped was so on my palette right now, I have ivory black, cobalt blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red light, yellow ochre, and flake white. And Matt had me add 2 more colors onto that full palette of colors that I can be using in the shadows. And so for the shadows then, what I started using, there's an area on Jamie in her neck that it's a really, really colorful, bright, airy shadow, and then also an area between her eyes as well. And so I made a mixture out of black, Chinese vermilion, and Naples yellow light. And using those 3 mixtures, I was able to get it to be really colorful in those areas. Before, I was using black, cadmium, red light, and yellow ochre, which does make a lighter area for the shadows, but it doesn't get it as colorful as using the vermilion and the Naples yellow with the black. So getting it to be more richer in that area helped me to push up then the values and the colors in the face as well. So then come Thursday, I feel like everything in the painting now is up to the same level of finish. So I want to start working in smaller areas and get them to be as specific as I can to how it looks on Jamie. And also now that like the values and the drawing are looking better, I want to really start working on getting the paint layers to how I'm applying the paint to look really interesting. And so I started working on her forehead. It's got a really bright area with the highlight, and there's a lot of interesting planes in her forehead as well. When she gets up into the position and she's looking, she pushes her forehead up, so you have the wrinkles in the forehead, which give her a really interesting expression. It's almost like a worried look or something, which I find it really, it's interesting, and I wanted to capture that. So going in the forehead, I mix up the colors that I already have on there because the colors that I have are pretty accurate. So I mix them up on my palette, and then what I'm doing to test the mixtures is I'll take my palette and then put a dab on my painting and make sure that the color is the exact color on the painting applied thickly. And then I'll mix up, if I need to be making small changes in the value or the color, I'll mix up those as well. And then so when I'm putting the paint on the forehead, I am really focusing on how I'm applying it thickly, following the planes around her face, and trying to connect brush strokes in those planes where it makes sense to. So it's now more than just trying to get the drawing and values and colors accurate, but now using how I'm laying down the paint in thicker paint strokes to really tell the story of what's going on in those areas. So I first work on the forehead, and then I work around the eye areas and trying to get the eyes really specific. I'm finding that I can still keep the eye area fairly unified, but show all the different variation as well that's in the eye area by using that Chinese vermilion and also the Naples yellow in the shadows. Just gives me a bigger range that I can push, like the really dark areas, like the iris or the pupil in her eye. I've been using pure black, and then adding the vermilion and the Naples yellow gives me like a really big range just in the shadows, from like super dark to really colorful shadow. And then even in areas where it's got the fleshy part under the eyebrow and a little bit of lights hitting her eyelid, then I can start actually using that as a light shape then. So I have a huge range in the shadow, and then I have a huge range in the light shape as well that I can play around with. And for my still life, I've been working on resolving areas in the still life. So the thing this week that I've been really focusing on is the scale and the paper, and I really want those two things to really feel like what they are. The paper feeling like brittle parchment, and then the scale feeling like that rough metal that it is. So I guess more of my focus has been on the scale, working on the chains, working on the temperature shifts in the scale, because there's a lot of really nice cools and warms along in it, and I'm pushing to get more cools in the scale, so that the blue bottle isn't just like the only really cold thing in the painting, but there's like a lot of variation of cold and warm all the way through the painting. So I still need to lay on some highlights on the chain of the scale and make those a little bit more blue highlights, and I think that'll balance out nicely. So how I'm laying down the paint on the scale, I'm doing a lot of different things. So I'm using paintbrushes, but what I've also started to do, especially in the chain area and then the top part of the scale where it has the straight thing that goes out towards the left of the painting, I've been applying the paint with a palette knife, and so I'll mix up different paint and not totally mix the paint perfectly together, but so there's a lot of different I guess, so you're still seeing like the broken color of the mixture, and so I'll take that on the end of a small palette knife, and with the tip of the palette knife I'll kind of scrape on the paint, kind of thin in some areas, but more where it's catching more light, I'll scrape the paint on a little bit thicker, and it's getting this really interesting look down the chain, this kind of like scratchy, rough, solid, rusty metal look. So I'm really liking how that is turning out. I think it's making a big improvement. And what I want to be doing this following week then is taking glazes over that, so it can kind of sink, certain colors can sink into the texture. And so there's a lot of, so it has that nice metal feel, and I can still be shaping, have like texture to it, but still be shaping the three-dimensionalness or the three-dimensionality of the individual links and different parts of the scale. And for the paper, which I didn't have too much time to work on this week because I was focusing more so on the scale, but I'm applying the paint differently to the paper as well, using brushes, but then also using a palette knife, and I'll mix up a color and still the same thing, kind of keep it a little bit broken color, and using the flat part, so not the end like I was using the end of the palette knife on the chains of the scale, but I'm using the flat part, and I'll put it down, some paint down, and kind of like smush it on the painting with the flat part of the palette knife. So it's getting this other area, or this other look of kind of like flaky paper. And then Matt was showing me how I can be then having that and have that dry, how I can glaze on top of that, and it sinks into that interesting like flat laid paint from a palette knife. The glaze will like sink into that texture, and I can scrape it off and then paint on top of that again with brushes and get a really interesting look. So yeah, the still life is going really well. I still have 2 more weeks to finish it up, and so now I'm really just resolving different areas, making them look, hopefully I'm making every part of the painting have a lot of variation in how the paint is applied. So it's more than just an image of a lot of different stuff that you can look at in this painting, but it's also a painting with a lot of different ways that paint is applied all the way through it. So I think there's a lot of interest that you can explore around the whole painting and keep finding new ways that like paint is laid down. But still at the same time, I'm really holding on to like that one single idea of the image. So it's still something that's really comfortable to look at with direction, where the light can move the eye around. So it's like I'm balancing, showing a lot of variation, but all that variation is still focused on that one idea of the image.